Zohran Mamdani's campaign had over 30,000 active volunteers, 50,000 signups. People are texting left and right saying, how do I canvass? Right? He's 33 years old. He is one of us, right? He uses social media. He knows how to use social media and communicate through that. The way that he speaks, the way that he jokes, it's extremely resonant with a base that's very discouraged by how politicians normally communicate. What Zoran Mamdani did was tell me what's wrong and let me see how I can help there. I think it's easy to fall into that trap when people don't vote the way you want. If you want to tap into why voters vote the way they do, you have to subvert that perception. And the reason that I offer this as a disclaimer before I really answer your question is because it's at the heart of Zoran Mamdani's campaign.
Hello and welcome to this episode of DawnNews English is DigiPod. I'm joined today by Faisal Lalani, who is a global community organizer. And today we're talking about the Zohran Mamdani campaign, which he's also been a part of and has seen. And we're excited to know Faisal because Dawn has been reporting a lot on Zohran Mamdani's campaign. Various aspects. And we're very intrigued because there's a lot of it. From a South Asian perspective, from just looking at it, what we saw of the U.S. elections and the polarization, and then it's so surprising that something like this happens, where he secures a win in the primary. How did this begin? Before, I mean, now obviously everybody's talking about Zohran Mamdani. Of course, he's been in the legislature prior to this, but how did you get involved? How did the campaign begin?
It's funny, Faria, when we started this call, you said that when I had first started talking about Zoran, you were also kind of like, oh, who is this guy? And a lot of my friends said the same thing for a long time. Zoran announced his mayoral launch, in the fall last year. I think it was October. And I was there at the time. I was at the launch. There was a good 100, 200 people, I think more. People knew Zoran. People were excited by him. He was a state assemblyman. He is a state assemblyman. And he'd really made a name for himself by, doing hunger strikes, by being unapologetically pro-Palestinian and speaking the truth to power. But he was still, in the larger scheme of things, he wasn't a big name, right? A lot of the times people still were like, who is Zoran? So when he started, it was a very much an uphill battle. I think a lot of the discourse around it was, let's see what happens. And I think the real mission was, let's just try to make a statement. Let's show that this progressive, youthful faction has a voice. And this has happened before in the political context of the US, which we can get into later. So Zoran Mamdani emerged in this political moment that I think you just laid out very well. In the context of Trump's win last November, there was this kind of emergent tension in the Democratic Party between kind of the establishment policymakers who wanted to stick to their more moderate policies, their more incrementalist policies, try to capture kind of this more center base, and then this more youthful, radical progressive faction who was really excited about change in politics and wanted to redefine the Democratic Party. This has been tried before, with AOC, the quote unquote squad. Uh, Barack Obama was more moderate, but he still had that excitement that he carried with him. So Zoran Mamdani emerged in this political moment as a result, as a circumstance of all of that. So that's one big thing. Two is that Zoran Mamdani is very young, right? He's 33 years old. He is one of us, right? He uses social media. He knows how to use social media and communicate through that. The way that he speaks, the way that he jokes, it's extremely resonant with a base that's very discouraged by how politicians normally communicate, and that's two. And then three, Zoran just embodies good politics. All of his policies the way that he puts himself out there, the way that he listens to voters is extremely resonant with people my age, with people who have long, left behind politics as something hopeless, as something that's never going to change. So all of these three things came together, and Zoran perfectly embodied all of this frustration that young voters had about the way things are done, this optimism that a lot of us who wanted things to change were trying to channel. And mostly he just came at a time when all seemed lost in terms of US politics and said, no, we can still push back, we can still do something.
So again, he emerged at a time where, at least from the outside, we saw that the US politics were extremely divisive. There was a move towards the right, populist politics. And of course, I mean, globally, what was happening now, typically for new candidates or otherwise, also politically, for to become an electable, especially if you don't have that kind of establishment support, you're often told to not be too radical and be pragmatic. But Zohran Mamdani's policies are not pragmatic, right? If you look,
Yeah.
they are, especially so. Of course, he's identifying as a socialist Democrat, and then when you hear the word socialist, you're like, oh my God! In the U.S. context, they will just paint it, and Trump has painted him as a communist, right? So the Red Scare immediately. And then he's speaking about Gaza or about Netanyahu, even Modi. And you think, well, how are you going to keep a lot of the supporters? And he's taken on Cuomo, and he's talking about APAC and also the Democratic establishment. These are not small things in the US context, right? Tell me how. And also, when we were hearing that New York moved a bit towards Trump, typically a blue liberal city, and as a New Yorker
Mm.
yourself, what is it that you witness? Because I mean, this is fresh out of the elections in operation. It hasn't been all that long since the elections happened, right? But how is it that even in sort of those who voted for Trump, it appears that they have voted for Mamdani?
Great question. And I'm going to start my answer from a personal standpoint because a lot of what you a lot of what you experience and witness, especially in US politics, is indicative of what you were describing in the beginning. So I talked to a lot of policymakers in the US, people who are running, even those people that start very passionate about, very kind of quote unquote radical progressive policies. And a lot of what I hear is, yeah, when you get on the campaign trail, when you start running, or when you become, when you're in office, you become more moderate. It's just a matter of fact because you need the funding. You have to accommodate and adhere to the Democratic Party tenets. You hear this everywhere. It's also just part of the ethos of politics in the US, and probably elsewhere. A lot of my friends, say that enough with this. We called it unpragmatic. I would just say these more out of touch policies, these things that are far more ambitious. We just need to combat Trump. We just need to combat this opponent or beat the Republican Party or whatever have you. So that's really where the discourse is was at for a long time. Now, after Trump won, there was, I alluded to this earlier, a frustration in the voter base, right? A lot of more traditional voters, and I define traditional voters as those that maybe aren't as politically engaged or identify with politics as strongly. They're aware of what's happening, usually through social media, but mostly, they go for a candidate one way or another by what they may hear about from their friends or family or how they resonate with a specific policy. So they get really frustrated saying, well, why can't people just vote this way? Because we want to topple, the opposition. We want to topple Trump. And then you have the other ones who are more ambitious, right? They want something new for this country. They want to change things. People who do identify more with politics. So there's this emergent tension. So now we get to Zoran's policies and where he's coming from, right? He definitely speaks to more of the latter. Uh, Fast and free buses was a big thing. City-owned grocery stores, free childcare, rent freezing. All of this, is very resonant with the New York City voter base. Everybody wants this. There was a thing after the last election where Zoran actually went out and he just interviewed people on the subway, on the streets, and he said, "Who did you vote for?" A lot of them said Trump. And like you said, right, a lot of them flipped. And so Zoran would ask them, "Why did you vote?" And I think the the common assumption is that the person who voted for Trump or didn't vote at all is the most extreme case. The ones who are against all immigrants, the ones who, support Trump in every which way. I think what Zoran proved, and he proved it through listening, through radical listening, through trying to sympathize with the voters, was that a lot of the reason that they voted the way they did was indicative of that kind of um, that gap, that political proximity. So a lot of them just talked about affordability. They talked about economic needs, right? They talked about being fed up with an establishment that never catered to them. And that was very real across all lines of the spectrum. So Zoran really tapped into that. And now his policies, he would always ask, he said, "Would you vote for a mayor that supported this, this, and this?" And they were rooted in the problems that people told him. They weren't top down, they were all bottom up. It's very new, right? I mean, when you vote for a politician, you usually hear what they have to say, and then you say, "Well, I like that." What Zoran Mamdani did was tell me what's wrong and let me see how I can help there. And as state assemblyman, he piloted some of these programs. He tried them out and he proved that they can work. Now, a lot of people do argue saying, well, this is not possible because, the governor said they're not going to support this. This is not feasible in this way or that. But I think what people are missing is that Zoran's ideology, Zoran's values still align with those policies. So if they don't work, Zoran still has the ability to stand behind them, adapt, listen to the people around him, work with business leaders, work with establishment Democrats to try to get things like this passed. And that says a lot more than the politicians that we've had in the past. So in terms of Zoran's policies, I think you have to look at the man behind the policies just as much and look at the values that he upholds relentlessly. He never backs down from them. So that's where a lot of his policies come from.
It's actually, I mean, social media has been our window into what the policies are, what the reactions are. And what you said that is, the criticism has been how can he achieve it if the governor is not behind him, etc. But he's also spoken a lot about connections, about network, right? What we saw with the cross-endorsing, with Brad Lander, and also a shout out to Brad Lander. It's so again, in terms of something that have been so divisive, to see people coming together and also people saying, well, we don't agree with everything that he is saying, but we will still support him because he's brought it's not oppositional politics or this guy's bad, right? Sure, there's critique of Cuomo, but he's presenting a plan and how to achieve the plan and how he's going to do it. And there's been a discourse changer, right? So speak a little bit about how this was built, because of course, I mean, social media harnessing we see, right, with ranking system explained by Mango Lassi and speaking in Bangla or Hindi, Urdu, Spanish, like all
Yeah.
of those videos. That's something that we're seeing. But the door to door, the people to people connection, being on the street, how important was all of that?
I think there's a general perception, especially now, that voters are ignorant, that it's so easy to appeal to people, that people are stupid because they don't pay attention or they vote this way. I have never been a fan of this perspective. I think it's easy to fall into that trap when people don't vote the way you want. But if you want to tap into why voters vote the way they do, you have to subvert that perception. And the reason that I offer this as a disclaimer before I really answer your question is because it's at the heart of Zoran Mamdani's campaign. The reason that he flipped a lot of districts that voted for Eric Adams or voted for Trump, and you can talk to a lot of voters who said, yes, I voted for Trump, but I also voted for Zoran, is because like across the board, people have very similar problems. And when you speak to those problems, people will vote for you, not across party lines, but across issues, across that policy resonance. So that's one. In terms of how the discourse has changed, I mean, one, you see we talk a lot about how jaded people get, not just in the US, but everywhere, right? The direction that the world is going with ongoing wars, with autocrats getting elected here and there. A lot of my own friends are texting me now saying, I want to get back into politics. Like, how do I volunteer? Zoran Mamdani's campaign had over 30,000 active volunteers, 50,000 signups. People are texting left and right saying, how do I canvass? I'm terrified of it, but I want to do this. I want to be a part of it. People are feeling guilty about not being more a part of it. It's very exciting energy in New York City. Um, and everywhere you go, Faria, you will see signs, you will see on social media, you'll see videos, and it's not just about the politics of it, it's also just the energy. There's so many different little fun groups about Zoran Mamdani, people in support of the way that he looks, the way that he speaks, how he presents himself. And that too is part of politics. I don't want to undercut this because the way that he looks, speaks, and presents himself is how we present ourselves, right? He's very laid back. He laughs a lot. The visual aesthetic of his campaign is something that's very like fun, and he's really closing that gap. That he's making that political proximity much closer than it ever has been. So, and that's two. And in terms of how we did it, which is my third and final point here, is one, I'll say we again, the whole movement, we started very early, earlier than usual campaigns start, right? I think I said he announced back in, I believe it was October. We started collecting petition signatures, in the fall when usually it's done, just few months prior. We empowered volunteers to be leaders, right? The campaign team was excellent in this. They held trainings for people who wanted to canvass. They encouraged canvassers to start their own groups, to host fundraisers. They really emphasized political discipline and they made it targeted. They looked, yes, at voters who normally vote Democrat, who would align with these policies, but they didn't just stick to them. They really focused on how do we expand that voter base? Who did vote for Trump? Who did vote for Adam? Who did vote or who didn't vote at all? And then they said, how can we reach them? Yes, there will always be some voters who will say, no, I don't care. I'm with this candidate all the way or this party all the way. But there's a good deal more voters who don't do that. So that was another big tenet. And then finally, we actually built a coalition. Sorry, I keep saying we. I want to give as much credit as possible to the core team. They built a coalition of kind of more left-leaning organizations who normally would get a lot associated with these politics, but maybe not cohesively. And they made it cohesive. They made it coherent, and they made it engaging, accessible, so everyone can join in all of these different channels. So through all of these tenants, Zoran Mamdani was able to build a base that everybody was talking about all the time. And you can feel it in New York City. Everywhere you walk, everywhere in the country, people are talking about it. I get texts from people all over the world saying, oh my God, what's happening in New York City? Can I move there? Or how do we replicate it here?
No, I mean, of course, outside of the US, there's a lot of trepidation of coming to Trump's America. But now, if it's going to be a Zoran Mamdani's New York, as the whole in November, who
Yes.
knows? But it's interesting because you use the word we. What I've been hearing him say is we constantly. It's never I. It's all about we and the policies, etc., which is also a very interesting shift, because typically you have these very individualistic politics. Here you again saw a shift, speaking to people who don't agree with you or who voted differently. And of course, I mean, in terms of the conversation, etc., I do also want to ask that there have been the uglier side of, the backlash. That sure you have, states people and Trump saying things, but then also we've seen on social media and otherwise, I mean, and he's spoken about this himself, about the threats that he's received, the Islamophobia. A lot of people are also talking about how over the past year, and especially with Zohran, it's been sort of post 9/11 US and the kind of environment and Islamophobia there was, the way that he's been demonized by other candidates and what was in the mail that voters received. And I mean, for things like eating with his hands, which has apparently turned into such a big deal. And of course, there are people rebutting. But can you also talk a little bit about this? And particularly, I mean, targeting Zoran is one thing, right? But then there would be a lot of other supporters, volunteers. Did they also feel the heat of Islamophobia or, these kind of threats?
It's extremely disheartening to see not only Republican Party members spouting all this Islamophobia, but even establishment Democrats, um, upholding this narrative that Zoran is an outsider, that he was associated with 9/11. It's actually insane to me because a lot of what you heard since the 2024 election from Democrats themselves is that we need someone to come and redefine the Democratic Party. We need a new and exciting leader. Well, one has emerged, and this is the reaction that they're giving. The fact that they're not endorsing him, the fact that they're still saying that his policies are outrageous, even though they see the excitement behind it, it's absurd. It's crazy to me. In terms of the death threats and the hate speech that he's been getting, I mean, you've heard him speak about it. I'm sure he gave an interview last week, where he was getting a bit tearful describing it. And I will say that a lot of this, yes, is politics as usual. And I don't want to make it all about that because this is unorthodox in a lot of ways too, right? There's a lot of talk about how Zoran is anti-Semitic, which is also crazy because he's never once appeared anti-Semitic. He's partnering with Brad Lander. He's always been in support of Jewish New Yorkers, of Judaism in general. And then no one ever acknowledges the Islamophobia that he's experiencing. There is this fundamental asymmetry between discrimination that is so indicative, I think, of the way that our political establishment operates in the United States. In terms of how voters feel it, in terms of how volunteers are feeling it, I think it's a little bit less so. I mean, we have group chats. I'm part of a Muslims for Mamdani group chat, kind of a core group in Queens. My friends all have different group chats in which we are looking at stuff online and sharing it, saying, "Did you see what this person said or this person said?" I think the response to it, at least in my own networks, I'm proud of it. I think people are laughing at it. People are still fighting back and saying, "Look, they're doing this because what we're doing is succeeding, right? What we're doing is working." And so you can say whatever you want, but clearly, we just won 56% of the vote, a 12-point margin. Um, and so resilience is key here. That's all I can really say about it. And I know that Cuomo and Adams are going to still be running and they're still going to be saying all this stuff. I just think that what Zoran has always been about is not fighting back, not pushing back, but fighting for and moving forward. And he will continue to do that. I applaud him for it. It's also very inspirational personally, right? I think this is another reason that so many people align with Zoran Mamdani. He's a good man at his core. I had so many friends, Faria, who ask me, "Is he actually that authentic? Is he actually like this in real life?" And the biggest endorsement that I can give for Zoran Mamdani is that yes, he is a good man in every corner of his life, on the trail or off. Yeah.
I mean, the word authentic, and that's actually something that I was going to bring up because a lot of the interviews, especially when people on the streets and a lot of the social media content that you see, the word authentic keeps coming up. There's resonance, it feels authentic. And of course, like, why not give some, I mean, again, with a millennial sort of leading the way, he resonates. It's something that is, and it's a break from the traditional politics, which it seems that he, like you said, that an ear to what people wanted, what change people wanted in their lives, right? Rather than pushing your own agenda on. There's road to November, there's still some time, right? How is this momentum going to be sustained? What are the plans to do that? And again, in terms of social media engagement, but then keeping that alive offline as well. How important do you think the offline online connection is?
That's a great question. To first answer, how do you keep up that momentum? I think it's that we have to keep up this more optimistic ethos that Soren has always channeled. I think we cannot get frazzled by all of this incoming negative attention from Trump, from establishment Democrats, from Republicans. I think we have to stay relentlessly positive about what we're fighting for. In terms of the offline and online connection, online, he has always done fantastic. The way that he comes across, I mean, my mom, God bless her, even she's telling me that, oh, I just saw Zoran's video on, Om Shanti Om, or speaking to me in Hindi. And, my mom never like talks to me about politics. And I love that, keeping that up, I think is going to be easy. Offline, we have to keep base building in core neighborhoods. We have to look at neighborhoods that still voted more for Cuomo and understand exactly why. A lot of people talk about, well, his policies may not have been as feasible. Well, again, going to my point much earlier on, it's not just about the policies, right? It's about the man behind the policies and the fact that he will still fight for what New Yorkers believe in. So that's kind of how you keep up the offline thing. And then, of course, trying to activate as many non-voters as possible. It's going to be imperative to see who didn't even vote in the primaries, why. I think we're going to see a lot more voters because once he won the primary, and this is the most important thing for you, people, every one of the naysayers who said this is not possible, this is pointless, politics is going nowhere, are now saying, I'm in. Let me know how I can help out. Let me help you fight this. And so I am more optimistic than ever that we will win in November. And if there's one final thing that I can say, and it's to something that I really loved, which you pointed out earlier, it's the fact that I kept saying we. Even though I'm not officially part of the team, even though I have volunteered and supported, saying we came so naturally to me. And it comes so naturally to everybody part of this campaign because we all feel like this is a movement. This is a movement. We are all part of what Zohran Mamdani is coming to offer. We've all been fighting for this for a long time. He is the vehicle, he is the vessel for all of this. But this is truly a movement for all of the youth, all of the people who have been frustrated with politics in the United States for a very long time and said, we want a better world. And now we're actually fighting for it.
I mean, and again, the campaign has sort of sparked this global optimism where I've also been seeing comments by everyone around the world who's saying we're not Americans, we're not voters, but we're rooting for him. That really is, like you said, there's a downward spiral, rise of authoritarianism. But here is a glimmer of hope, right? That things can be done differently. They were done differently. There was a departure from traditional methods, and it's actually yielded results, as like you see with the primary win, right? And so it's not just about, big talk, but actually this achieved. And of course, a lot of hard work went into it. Faisal, thank you so much for making time and speaking to us about the campaign. And of course, there's a lot of good luck that a lot of people will be sending, and also keeping their eyes as this goes forward into the actual elections in November. Thanks, Faisal, for joining DigiPod on DawnNews English. That's all that we have today.